hero. He was a bit of a buffoon who was constantly bewildered by the antics of his physicians.
Absolutely, absolutely, you're right. He was an innocent.
Yes.
He was an innocent in this war. He was a doctor, for heaven's sake, stuck as a military commander. And he was never, you know, he was never the most competent person there, but he was just kind of a nice guy, right? And so when you lost him, it was particularly devastating. If he'd been a heroic character, you'd go, oh yes, it'd be very dramatic. Yes, he went to a hero's death, and it was okay. He'd be happy with this. But to have that character die in such a way, in such a meaningless way, I mean, he was going home.
But still,
right?
I think if you'd had Hawkeye and what's his friend? Pierce. Yeah, and his friend Trapper John, randomly killed by machine gun fire, which is equally likely to happen in a real war.
Yeah.
I think that would have been unsurvivable for the series, because
Absolutely.
it was them processing these terrible things, these random acts of violence that the series was built around. So I think that, but his death was, wow, made the point. But you couldn't just go and wipe out the village and keep it.
Okay, yes.
I have two questions which are kind of related. One which you mentioned about playing around with reader expectations and kind of going against it. How early in the book is it appropriate to do it? Like if you do it very early, will that really pull the reader out? Or should you feed them first something which actually plays along the expectations and then pull them out? Or how early can you do it?
However it works for your story, you could do it on the first page if you wanted to do it on the first page, or you could do it, on the last page. But the last page you have to be more careful. The first page you just set them up and say, okay, I'm the kind of, hopefully I'm the kind of writer that you are not going to know what comes next, and if you're okay with that, that's cool. So sometimes it can be very effective to do early, but the story is more important than playing with your character, playing with your audience. You need to get the story done first. Go ahead, no, go ahead.
No, I just said, my question back would be, why? You know, what is the goal of the change? And I think that the answer would depend on the answer on the answer to that question.
I mean, if you're trying to establish the protagonist or kind of show what kind of person, like you said, as if you're showing, for instance, what you said about a prostitute with a heart of gold who's a maid. You're trying to show something about a character, and you first show them in their regular reader expectations, and then turn around and show them what they are like actually in your book.
I think you have to start that early, and with rather than a point in the book, I would say if it's a core aspect of the character, you throw it in with little bits here and there, and then build up that sort of secondary modification of the core thing.
Shared secrets are amazingly powerful. If the reader shares a secret with the writer, then you can do all sorts of things. And it's one of the reasons I like Dragon Bones. It's one of my favorites books. My favorite book to have written was Dragon Bones. I had the most fun with it because I had a character who was, to everybody else in the book, he was big, he could fight, he was not too bright, he had had some damage that made him speak slowly. And yet the reader and me and I knew that he was really smart and kind of funny. And so you'd set up for a lot of really poignant and also really funny scenes that only the reader and I shared. And maybe the reader and I, the main character, shared. So that's really powerful. I think for side characters you can wait as long as you want to. But for protagonists, it's part of the not lying to your audience. The person that you want them to view the story from, and whose viewpoint you want them to have in the story. So the character whose intentions and whose purpose is going to touch your readers, that person has to be honest. You have to know who they are.
But the reader can know who they are without the whole world knowing.
Yeah.
One of the things I find when I work with people who don't have as much experience writing is make sure that the surrounding world is a character, in a sense that even people who are extras react to your main characters. And for example, I learned this lesson with Mel, my main character, the prostitute of the heart of gold and stuff. He's supposed to be super beautiful, like the kind of beautiful that you think was touched up with he's bioengineered to be that way, right? He may even have certain pheromones that kind of help with the whole thing. And if you just say that or describe him, if you have that too much an internal part of him, it gets to be narcissistic. So what I needed to do is to have the world react to him that way. And that was one way of complementing his point of view by seeing people's reactions to him.
And my related question to the same, my previous question was that how often in your book can you show these reversals of expectations? Not reversals, but kind of playing around with it and giving, is there a place where it becomes too much, or is it okay for?
If it works, it's fine. If it doesn't work, it's too much. And I know that sounds really blasé, but it's true. It depends on your skill as a writer, and it depends on how big the flip-flops are. And it depends on how much we have invested in your story, okay? So for instance, when we're happily buzzing along in The Warrior's Apprentice, Bujold's The Warrior's Apprentice, how many of you have read this? Oh, go out and treat yourself. Oh my goodness, start reading Bujold. But The Warrior's Apprentice, you think you're reading a story about a young protagonist going out on his own for the first time, but you are. And you're really invested in all of these characters. And there's one character, if you've been reading this series, this is the first book starring Miles Corsican, but there were 2 books earlier with his mother. So his armsman, you know from the previous 2 books, and you know a lot about him, and you really like him. He's one of those damaged characters that you really, really care about. So you think you're in the middle of an adventure comedy, and you get to a certain point, and something terrible happens. And it's a huge reversal in the tone of the story. But because she made you believe in her world, because you're not reading this as a comic science fiction adventure, you're reading it as the adventures of Miles Corsican, who is a human, and whom you like very much. When it happens, it's not like, oh my gosh, the story just suddenly changed shoes, and I don't want to read this kind of story. It fouls from the setup. It is exactly the right thing to do. It is incredibly powerful, and you find yourself laughing and crying on the same page. It's amazing when it works. When it doesn't work, it means they stop reading your book and they throw it against the wall and they never pick up another one to read.
Let's comment over there.
Also, if I'm right, you're thinking about with this particular character, in another writer's hands, he would be a villain, he's a patron.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah,
For
absolutely. This is
yeah.
the kind of character, if you met him in real life, it's kid the cheapers out of you. But what's that?
And should.
And should, yes. But we like him because his whole purpose in life is protecting Miles. He's one of those people who follow orders very well, and he's damaged, and he attaches to what people's expectations are of him. And if the person who's in charge of him expects a villain, that's what he is, and if they expect a hero, that's what he is. And it's an amazingly powerful character. And the other thing it demonstrates on a real basis, that this is why this is not fluff literature. This is stuff that really matters. It teaches us how much we affect the world around us, which I think is a very powerful lesson. When you're 13, you don't think anything you do matters, and that's part of the problem of being 13. And as writers, what we are always trying to do is better our own understanding of the human condition and also allow readers to do the same thing.
And my answer to the question of how often you do it and when, I think if it's a case of there being something about a character that is unusual, so it fits a pattern but then there's an unusual aspect, you have to keep that up throughout the whole thing. But if it's something where a character is going to surprise us, then you maybe do that once. But you have to have put, I think about the murder mysteries. I don't write murder mysteries, but the ones where the guy who done it is not who you thought, but when you think about it, you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. That happened. I think if you're going to do a surprise, you have to do it in a way that the reader can retroactively see the hints that were dropped.
The most brilliant case of this, and he could never have done it in a book, it had to be a movie, was Sixth Sense. Where you watch, now I don't know, your mileage may vary, and I'm usually very good at spotting things like that, but I liked the movie so much I was just caught along with it. I did, until the wedding ring hit the floor, I didn't understand what was going on. And that was brilliance, that was a brilliant writing. I do have friends who knew right away, but oh well. And the cool thing about it is the movie worked as well either way. Knowing or not knowing, it didn't matter, it was still a great movie. I watch it, about twice a year anyway, because I enjoy it.
So we've got 5 minutes. We got another question or two?